Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Apologies for the slight delay there. We'd like to welcome you all tonight to our webinar on the new NOVA collection on PBS Learning Media and on helping students spot science misinformation. I think we're waiting for our first slide. My name is Denise Olson. I'm the Director of Education Marketing at GBH. For those of you not familiar with GBH, we are a flagship station in the PBS network, and we partnered with PBS to create the PBS Learning Media platform, which is a free digital learning platform for pre-K through 12. You'll see here that during the last school year, the platform had 17 million users who took advantage of the resources on PBS Learning Media. And we'd encourage you to go check it out, or if you haven't visited for a while, go refresh your account and dig in. Next slide, please. So tonight from GBH Education and NOVA Education, we have these three presenters. Let me pull up my notes here. Sorry. Ralph Bouquet is the Director of Education and Outreach for NOVA, the PBS science documentary series produced by GBH Boston. At NOVA, Ralph and his team support science educators through the creation of free classroom resources and engage new audiences for NOVA's broadcast and digital productions. Ralph is also a former high school science teacher. Sean Stevens is the Director of STEM Curriculum and Instruction at GBH. Prior to joining GBH, she spent several years doing educational research focused on student and teacher learning and developed instructional materials for both formal and informal settings. She was part of the team that defined the core ideas and progressions for physical science for a framework for K through 12 science education, which was the foundation for the next generation science standards. Our special guest tonight will speak on the topic of helping students spot science misinformation. Dr. Brian Southwell is a distinguished fellow and lead scientist for public understanding of science at RTI International. For much of his career, Dr. Southwell has found creative ways to use data to answer important questions about the effectiveness of communication interventions, which improve understanding and motivate behavior and about popular understanding of science. I'm now going to turn it over to Ralph.
All right. Thank you so much, Denise. Welcome, everyone. Good evening. Great to see you all. And I actually cannot see you all, but we're so happy and grateful to have you join us this evening for this webinar and for what will be a very enriching discussion. I'm highlighting this new updated collection of NOVA resources, but also talking about science misinformation, an issue that I think in our rapidly changing digital and social media landscape has become an issue that many of you educators are having to face. And we're really excited to talk about some strategies that can help students and help educators be more informed about how to manage this issue in the classroom. And so for the next hour or so, we're going to first just do a little overview and a tour, rather, of some of the really exciting features that are included in the new NOVA collection. We'll also talk and hear from my colleague, Sean Stevens, who will talk about some of the highlights of resources in the collection and some strategies for integrating those resources into your instruction and pedagogy. Then we'll hear from Dr. Brian Southwell, who will present some of his best strategies and tips for educators to use when dealing with the issue of science misinformation in the classroom. And then we'll open it up for a Q&A. Please remember to use the chat and Q&A feature on Zoom, on Facebook, or on YouTube to ask your questions, and then we'll be sure to get to them during the Q&A. So we really, again, appreciate you all being here, and we're really excited to talk about this new collection. And so I'll just get started and just reminding you all what sort of the mission of NOVA Education, which is the education department for NOVA, the science documentary series on PBS. For those of you who may not know, last year was a very exciting year for NOVA. We celebrated our 50th anniversary as a PBS production, and those 50 years have included hundreds of documentaries that have been produced on issues related to the ancient Earth, to space, to the human world, to innovation and incredible achievements in science and mathematics and engineering. And so we're really, really excited that this 50th anniversary offered an opportunity for us to really revisit ways in which we can better equip educators and students to explore and to engage with the huge wealth of resources that we have produced over the years. And so, as a reminder, our mission really is to think about how we can empower educators, youth, and lifelong learners by fostering curiosity in the sciences through these engaging educational resources, by promoting inclusive science communication. So thinking about how do we communicate science in ways that are inclusive and that really consider all the different ways that people are encountering science and the different experiences that shape our relationship with science. And also amplifying the voices of the next generation of leaders in STEM. So thinking about opportunities to really highlight the scientists who are discovering new things and making new innovations and sharing that with students, and also providing opportunities and career pathways for students to really think about ways in which they can continue to engage in the sciences. And so this has been a core part of our mission, and we're really excited with this new PBS Learning Media collection. And I'm going to just take a quick moment just to share a trailer. This is a sneak peek at a video that we've been producing that really highlights, the impact of the NOVA brand in the classroom. And you'll hear from a couple of teachers who've shared their thoughts and their feedback and their experiences with NOVA. And so I'll go ahead and play this video right now.
For 50 years, NOVA has been inspiring people with stories of science that spark curiosity and explore the limits of what we believe is possible. And in classrooms across the country, teachers have been using NOVA to bring these compelling stories to their students.
Teaching science through stories is a really great way to present information. I've taken that to heart, and it makes it more meaningful for the students.
The stories are told are so interesting, so engaging, so memorable.
For the 50th anniversary of NOVA, we are excited to announce the launch of a new NOVA PBS LearningMedia collection with over 1,000 free resources from NOVA films, digital series, apps, and more. Search for clips from NOVA films with resources for lesson planning for any topic you teach, all aligned to national and state teaching standards.
I'd show it when it's relevant to our content area, and they really enjoy not just the animations and how the principles are illustrated, but also the fact that NOVA showcases a number of people of different backgrounds. So if the students see somebody that looks like them, they really connect with that.
I love NOVA because I can trust it. Like, I can trust when I'm looking for a video clip, it's going to be high quality. It'll be good scientific information.
Whether you want to explore the deepest reaches of space, travel back in time, or understand the latest advances in technology, this new collection will inspire your students through engaging videos, games, and activities, and introduce them to the scientists and STEM careers shaping our future.
I wanted to make sure that my students had all different avenues of understanding science, and science became interesting to them.
When my students watch the NOVA programming and they see folks from different parts of the world all trying to tackle these problems that we have and trying to find solutions, it's really important they make that connection, which makes them engage and makes it more relevant to them.
And that's one of the things that's been great with the NOVA series is they always show people doing really interesting things and having interesting careers. So I'm in a position where I can help kids to see the potential for themselves.
Visit the NOVA collection on PBS LearningMedia and start exploring today.
All right. Oh. We are not watching that again. My apologies. But thank you all so much. This was really, really exciting opportunity to share this video with you all. And we are, again, thrilled that we have been able to put this collection together and really provide a really more fresh, more innovative, and more user-friendly experience for educators who are accessing this collection on PBS Learning Media. And so I'll just give a quick rundown of some of the things that are new and exciting about this collection and how you can use it in the classroom. The first thing I'll note is that, we now have a much more improved organization and navigation with the collection. And so using the NGSS, we've sort of reorganize our resources in ways that make it easier for you, whether you teach physical science, physics, chemistry, bio. You'll see that the organization of the resources allows for a lot more visibility of all the resources within not only those disciplines, but also within those topics. And again, that increased visibility, again, makes it easier for you to find the resources that you need for whatever topic you are teaching. In addition, one of the things we've really wanted to do is to highlight special NOVA films and series. There are several films and series that are extremely popular, shows like the Hunting the Elements series, the Making North America series, the Your Brain series. These are some of our really exciting tentpole series. And now these series are now prominently featured on the homepage of the NOVA collection, make it easier for you to find those shows that are most memorable and that you and your students enjoy. And then we've also added a search functionality within the NOVA collection. And so this means that when you are at the NOVA collection and you're looking specifically for NOVA resources, you can sort of it allows you to sort of focus just within that collection. And so I know in the past, this wasn't something that we had, and it made it a bit sometimes more challenging to find just exclusively NOVA resources. But that feature is now accessible wherever you are in the collection. And so I'll just highlight a couple of the features and in this brief tour here. You can see here, this is an example of one of the sub-collection pages. We're just highlighting all the Earth and space science resources that exist in the collection. And you'll see that there is now a search functionality within the collection that only delivers NOVA resources. In addition, we've also added a very simple topical organization for each of the major disciplines. And so this is aligned again to the Next Generation Science Standards Framework. This allows you to very, very easily jump to the topics that you're looking to teach and to find resources that are best aligned to those topics. In addition, now in every single disciplinary collection, you'll see a section at the bottom that highlights people in that particular discipline. And this is very useful for educators because for those of you who want to really inspire your students to think about career pathways and STEM, this is a really great way to highlight the scientists that are doing that work. And so here you can click on each of those profiles, and in those profiles, many of them are from The Secret Life of Scientists and Engineers. You'll find videos that talk about their research interests, their hobbies, their personal stories. You can also easily search within that list to find scientists for whatever discipline you're looking for. In addition, we've also made it a lot easier for you to view all the resources within a topic. And so those days of sort of clicking next page, next page no longer exist anymore. Here, it's just a simple button, allows you to see every single resource that is in a particular topic. And you can also really quickly switch topics. So if you see here, there is a little topic sub-menu here. There's a little pull-down menu. If you click that menu button, you can then jump to each of the topics within that discipline. So if you're in physical sciences, you can look at matter interactions, you can look at waves, and all those topics are sort of organized within that pull-down menu. The last thing I'll also note is that you can now browse all NOVA film and digital series collections with very dynamic signature art. And so we heard from many educators that they wanted to find specifically, they're looking for a specific show that we've done. And now all of those shows, those big projects that have their own designated collections are now very easy to find on the homepage of the PBS Learning Media collection. And so you can just go straight to that website and you'll see every single show or even digital series. We have several YouTube series that are in this collection that now have a designated page that you can see on the homepage. And so that integration and that sort of visibility, I think, will make it much easier for you to find the content that you're looking for within the NOVA collection. So now we'll quickly transition to talking about NOVA resources and how you can integrate them into your instruction. And I will pass it on to my colleague, Sean Stevens, who will share some really great tips and strategies for you all.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ralph. And thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. Next slide, please. So we're going to dig into individual resources and hopefully provide some inspiration for how you can use some of these in your instruction. NOVA's great at a lot of things, but one of, as far as classroom instruction goes, one of the things they're great, best at is really making those the science content come alive and be meaningful to students. They have that science, technology, and society connection just down. And we have things coming from current events and things that are meaningful for communities, individuals, building resilience to climate change impacts. All of these things can be really inspiring and help students connect to the content. In addition, NOVA takes us around the world, throughout the universe, to engage in just an immense range of phenomena. As we're selecting clips from these films, we're really trying to think about how we can represent phenomena in ways that will either raise questions to investigate, provide some examples of evidence that students can use to make claims about these phenomena, ways to connect the science content to their lives, to society. Or we're trying to illustrate the nature of science. Like, how do scientists and engineers figure out stuff, figure out solutions to the problems? How do they know? What's the evidence? So those are the types of things that we think about when we're making these resources. And then, of course, as Ralph said, these resources are great for expanding students' ideas about who does science and hopefully help them see themselves as scientists. Next slide, please. This is just kind of a random selection of resources to illustrate just the range of content in this collection, because we have so many resources where we're looking for objective ways to evaluate whether a district is gerrymandered. We hear about semiconductors all the time. Like, what's the deal with that? What are they? What kind of challenges do engineers have to overcome to both design and manufacture such complex, tiny little machines? It turns out that eating potato chips really is addictive, and our biological reaction to that is very similar, actually, to using many other substances. So we can, just through a range of ways, we can engage in content and come up with some really interesting questions. Next slide, please. Next, please. So this is just to tell you where it is. Something that we've made a lot of resources recently is that that relationship between technology and our lives. How do we keep our data secure when we're online? Are search engines really giving us the types of information that we think? And AI, everybody's kind of freaked out by it. Is it scary? Is it good? We have resources. This one illustrated here is about bias, but we have just a couple published today and a few more coming out very soon about really the positive effects AI can have, like how it may be able to help detect and maybe prevent cancer in the future. So there's a lot of hope and there's a lot of fear, but there's a balance, and we can, these resources can help you have these discussions in your classroom. Next slide, please. And these all can be used in a lot of different ways. This one is, I'm going to just show you, is has some designed to be flexible. With this one here, you can see we have cellulose by adding that nitro group. We go from something that can barely burn to kind of a pretty nice backyard fireworks. So at middle school level, when kids are learning about just that structure, property kind of relationship, this would be good for that. Next, please. And then when we just rearrange those same elements, we get the a bigger excuse me, a bigger explosion. And then, but if we go up to high school, we can start thinking about this in a different way. That third video really focuses on one of the biggest misconceptions in chemistry. You know, that most people think that you get energy is released when you break bonds, when actually you have to input energy in order to break bonds. So it goes, it addresses that directly. And this whole set is actually about thinking about chemical reactions from a force and energy perspective, so that you're really focusing on where the energy comes from in these explosions and how that's released. Next slide, please. These resources, you can use them to just dig in, have some interesting stories that just might not get from when we're studying. These were all new to me. I'm a chemist, so they're all related to evolution and how different interactions amongst Earth systems affected evolution. Things like that plant-fungi relationship. You know, plants wouldn't have made it onto land without it. We all know about how important oxygen is, but a different form of oxygen, ozone, also had a big impact. At a period of time when ozone was removed largely from the atmosphere, it seems to have led to a mass extinction. So there are all these really interesting ways that our Earth systems interact and drove the evolution, not just of life, but of our planet. And we can investigate those types of things using NOVA resources. Next slide, please. And then, of course, the subject of the evening, misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation Nation here is a set of resources that lets you dig into the topic with your students and investigate things like, how does misinformation spread so quickly? Why are we so vulnerable to clickbait? And from a psychological perspective. And here we have illustrated this routine that they can use in order to evaluate information. Just so you know, CAP means it's false. So it actually is appropriate for this particular routine. But, you know, I think when you're talking about critically evaluating information, this is something that is inherent to science, and it's something that you can help students build their skills throughout science instruction, not just in this explicit instruction. Next slide, please. For example, I think we've all learned somewhere, probably more as a fact, that an asteroid hit Earth about 65 million years ago. But in a video from Making North America, they really go into the evidence to learn so we can understand why they believe that. So first, they're looking at this very thin layer of with a different composition material than the really thick layers above and below it. That thin layer means suggests that it was a very short event deposited this material. So next, please. Then they go through and look at this through a microscope and see glass beads. But then that suggests there was enough energy to melt rock. Natural phenomena that could do that would be massive a volcanic eruption naturally, but also it's consistent with giant asteroid collisions. get another piece of evidence there, shocked quartz, you need even more energy. Phenomena consistent with that would be nuclear bomb and asteroid collision. So we can kind of roll out the bomb 65 million years ago. So all of this is consistent with an asteroid collision. So this has gone from then a fact to an evidence-based argument. Next slide, please. Reasoning is the hardest part of that when constructing an explanation, with the claim, evidence, and reasoning. So, we try to have, when possible, have scientists discussing the evidence just to kind of illustrate and get and model for students how to do this. And you can support them in thinking about and making sure they think about like how the evidence how does it support the claim. One way to kind of step into that reasoning is to think about counter arguments. I think this because with all my evidence, this person disagrees with me, but they are wrong because, and that's kind of a step to get to reasoning that might help them kind of understand what we mean by when we're talking about reasoning in this situation. Next slide, please. Somewhere else where we want to think about evidence would be talking about climate change. A lot of teachers asked about that and ideas about how we can address that. And we have tons of resources on climate change, its impacts, geoengineering, and building resilience. But I wanted to point this one out tonight because this set really lays out the evidence really nicely. It starts from the beginning. How do we know that carbon dioxide traps heat when it's in our atmosphere? Digs into how do we know what the carbon dioxide levels were 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, and the fact that it's direct evidence, which makes it even stronger, right? And then I have to admit that I didn't know, but beyond just the implicit correlation of, when the increase of carbon dioxide starting when with the Industrial Revolution. This is the first time I actually saw a real piece of evidence, which really excited me. They collected the sample of air, looked at the radioactive decay, found that it was extremely low, essentially not there, which means that the carbon is older than 50,000 years old. So no natural phenomena would release carbon with that characteristic. The only thing that would be fossil fuels. So there's some like real evidence of that instead of just being a fact that somebody tells you. So there's no single way or no miracle to get people to believe that in climate change if they don't. But I think, if we just keep going and giving them evidence and slowly but surely we'll get them one by one. Next slide, please. Another way to deal with science misinformation is also to focus on the nature of sciences and engineering. These are processes, and the processes are not ever, or unless you're really, really lucky, they're not linear. Like there's tons of failure in building this rocket that eventually got us to the moon. There's every time NASA builds a new telescope, and now this time it's the James Webb Telescope. It's, they're seeing things they never even imagined, and so they're going to have to change their models. And so these are the processes. So even though an expert said something a month ago, a year ago, that's different than today, maybe they have a good reason for it. The evidence changed. They have some new information. And so this process, it's really important for people to understand and to interpret how our experts are sharing information with us. So I hope some of these have given you some inspiration to at least check out the collection. And I'm happy to help you if you if you have any questions or looking for something in particular. But now I'm going to turn it over to Ralph, who will introduce Dr. Southwell.
All right. Thank you so much, Sean. Um, but yeah, we're again very excited to be sharing this with you all and appreciate and your questions and your comments over the course of the webinar. I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Brian Southwell, who is a distinguished fellow at RTI International. He also holds adjunct appointments at Duke University, the University of Delaware, and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He has served in various roles for the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, as well as on advisory committees for the World Health Organization, Council of Medical Specialty Societies, and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. His research appears in more than 150 journal articles and chapters, and he has published 4 books, including Misinformation and Mass Audiences. Dr. Southwell actually also contributed to the Misinformation Nation series, as well as our NOVA Science Studio program. And so we are just very, very excited and happy that he's been a part of the extended NOVA family for a few years now. And so very excited to welcome Dr. Southwell for his presentation on misinformation.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Ralph. It really is an honor to be here tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all. As it turns out, actually, NOVA first appeared on air in March 1974. And actually, as it turns out, I first appeared in the world in March 1974. So we have literally grown up together. And so it's just a real honor to be here to be part of this conversation. Something, though, that we are facing, at this moment is what seems to be a relatively sudden and emergent threat. But as I want to talk about, this has been a challenge that has been with us for a long time as we've dealt with, both students and greater publics, and as we think about the translation of science. So, Ralph, if you want to go ahead and pull up slides, I'll offer a few remarks here. That'll be great. So, what I want to talk about tonight is really what I'm hopeful you can take away anyway is an approach to thinking about what is a complicated and a challenging issue. We've already had it alluded to, and there's a lot of ways in which what I want to offer dovetails really quite nicely with what Sean just had to say. Ralph, if you want to move to the next slide, that'd be great. So, a question that I think is resonant for many of us is this question of how it is that we might actually keep our students safe in a world in which it seems as though there's a great prevalence of misinformation. If I were to ask you all to raise your hand right now, which of you have actually encountered a student that seems to be referring to misinformation or seems to be misled by misinformation, I suspect that many of your hands would go up. Right now, this has been a challenge that's been both in our headlines and one that we've seen, in our classrooms and in our discussions with students in different ways. But I worry that by simply focusing on this as a threat, and you go ahead, Ralph, to the next slide. That's fine. That we actually are asking somewhat the wrong question. I think the real question for us here tonight is how is it that we actually might be able to build and maintain trust, amongst different communities. I think we need to spend a little bit less time, worrying solely about, blaming, those that are misled, those that don't trust us, those that are, frankly, perhaps putting false information out into the environment. There's lots of, sources of that, and we can talk about that. But I think ultimately our way through this is going to be a matter of, instilling, encouraging, building, maintaining trust. And that's something that sources like PBS Learning Media certainly can aid in. And that's one of the reasons I was happy to be here to talk about this today. So I want to shift our attention slightly away from solely just worrying about all the challenges in the world with regards to inaccurate information, and instead think about what we might proactively and positively do about it. And I have some ideas, since that's what I want to offer here quickly. If I want to move to the next slide. Something that I want to point out, just as a place to start our conversation, is that inaccurate information about science, misinformation about science, it's not new. It's something that we are worried about in recent years. We have reasons that the current information environment poses some tremendous challenges, but we've also been dealing with inaccurate information about science for quite some time. If I were to call any one of you a snake oil salesperson or a snake oil salesman, you'd be offended by that. I mean, you'd be offended by that because it's a real turn of phrase. It has meaning in our colloquial language, but it actually is also something that's rooted in a real historical set of incidents in which there was concern about the fraudulent promotion of snake oil liniment and different medicines. In fact, in some ways, that was the precursor to some of the regulation we have of our current information environment with regards to medical advertising. And so that's something that's important. That we've been dealing with this for actually quite some time. If you move to the next slide, I also want to offer another point, which I think is important. And that is that misinformation is also a bit of a buzzword these days. And I think it's really important for us to approach this with some humility, to suggest that misinformation about science really is a problem and a challenge for us, but it's also something that we need to define in a particular way. We can't just call everything we don't like or everything that's a matter of difference of opinion or values misinformation. But in fact, we can point to a serious phenomenon that's happening in instances where people are raising claims that really are at odds with the weight of evidence. So I'm happy to announce that in December, the National Academies for Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine released a really exhaustive consensus study on understanding and addressing misinformation about science. I had the pleasure of being one of the co-authors on this report, but I'm also really happy to note that there were 15 scientists and folks from different disciplines pulled in to be part of this really exhaustive look, which was a more than 2-year effort to look at the literature and look at what we know and what we don't know about why it is that misinformation about science proliferates, what it is that might be done about it. One of the most important pieces of this report is actually the definition of misinformation about science that the committee developed. And if you can advance just one click here, Ralph, we'll put the definition on the screen. And this actually directly relates to something that Sean just pointed out. And I'll get to that in just a moment. But I just want to give you this sense of misinformation about science as being a problem that occurs when there are instances in which information that asserts or implies claims that are inconsistent with the weight of accepted scientific evidence at the time emerges, and you might be worried about this as a phenomenon. Now, that notion of the weight of accepted scientific evidence at the time is important because science itself is iterative. Science itself evolves, and it is possible that a claim from 1957 might be outdated today based on new evidence. And I think it's really important for us all to perhaps strive towards a better understanding of the process of science. That might be a place where we would both increase trust in scientific institutions and scientific organizations, but also, I think, be ready for the fact that, tomorrow's headlines might bring us something slightly different in some instances when there is new and emergent evidence. So it's really important, and the committee thought it was really important to point out that which claims are determined to be misinformation about science can evolve over time as new evidence accumulates and as scientific knowledge regarding those claims advances. This is something that I think is crucial, and it's crucial for us to have some humility with regards to science in general. If you want to move to the next slide, I also want to make another point historically. And that is that the word science itself has been used by organizations at times in ways that now, looking back historically, we recognize that it was not really a matter of people using the best available evidence that they had, even at the time. You certainly saw this in the case of claims that were advanced in the name of eugenics as just one really dark turn, an awful example, from our history. But the word science was attached to some of those claims, and so this is another reason why we do need to approach this, I think, from a stance of some humility. If you move to the next slide here. So ultimately, what I want to suggest is that we really should be having empathy for students and families who might raise a question that seems to reflect inaccurate information. That our first move shouldn't be to shame and to blame and to be, disgusted, but rather to recognize that we're all in this situation together. Frankly, as human beings, we are somewhat vulnerable to the prevalence of misinformation in some ways. There are things we can do about this, but it's also really important to point out a number of ideas that we've found as we think about social science in this arena. The first is that human beings generally are what we might think of as biased towards acceptance. All I mean by that is that when we encounter a stimulus or a piece of information, we need to process it at least for a moment. And the best available cognitive science right now suggests that actually there are different parts of our brain that detect information initially versus that which labels it as being false or true. And so you can imagine in situations where people are fatigued or not skilled and understand vocabulary in a particular area, there's possibilities for being vulnerable to misinformation for reasons other than malicious intent or other than reasons other than just being a human being. It's also the case that we as human beings share information and we share misinformation for all kinds of reasons. Not all of them have to do with our careful attention to the truth per se. There are some instances in which we are trying to signal our allegiance to a group, or we're trying to signal or actually point out something to make conversation with another person sitting next to us at the bus stop. We often have conversations, for example, if you're in an elevator and you're talking to somebody about the weather, you both have just been outside, chances are, you both are aware of what the weather is, but you're making conversation, you're making small talk, and partly as a way of signaling your sense of community with them. And we do this all the time. And I think that it's also the case that we do this online sometimes with sensational information and with information that may not be fully accurate. Again, this is another reason why we might want to be somewhat empathetic, at least, when it comes to seeing the spread of sensational information. Those that actually craft misinformation have an advantage over careful peer-reviewed articles because it can be crafted and designed to be sensational. It can be designed to travel. There's nothing magic about it being false, but it often is framed in a way that it is sensational. And so it makes sense that people would pay attention to this and talk to a neighbor and say, hey, haven't you seen this? It's also the case that in the United States, historically, we've had a regulatory approach to our information environment that's respected the free flow of information. And generally, we do sometimes call out problematic information. In the case of the Food and Drug Administration, for example, they have called out problematic direct-to-consumer drug ads, but that's often done in a post hoc way. The information's already out there. And so that's something also really important to keep in mind that on the internet or even on our commercial airwaves, sometimes it's possible to see information that isn't fully accurate. So another reason why we should be, I think, somewhat empathetic when it comes to the situation of our students. Lastly, we also know that we can correct misinformation, but doing so is hard. You have to do so with the same level of exposure as the original piece of problematic information, and you also need to make sure that you're pretty explicit about what it was that was wrong that you're pointing out. So all those are challenges that we face, but it doesn't mean there's nothing we can do in terms of guiding our students. If you move to the next slide, I can offer a few more thoughts. So generally speaking, we really need to keep in mind the nature of our information environment, the nature of what people attend to, and how and why it is that certain information gains traction and gains audiences. One story that I like to tell has to do with a woman by the name of Belle Gibson, who rose to fame, or really rather infamy, in Australia a number of years ago as a social media influencer. Who she had a lot of claims with regards to the relationship of nutrition and cancer, which turned out to be quite false. She made claims about her own experiences with cancer. It turned out to be false because, in fact, she actually never had cancer. But instead of just worrying about her ethical lapses, we also need to think about why it was that information was appealing at all. Why did it actually gain traction on social media? Well, partly because it was offering hope in the face of a really devastating disease. And that's something that we have to think about. To what extent is information offering hope to people that otherwise are feeling alienated? And when you have situations of alienation and vacuums like that, often misinformation can travel. And we've got to think about the extent to which our scientific information is framed in the same kind of way. And if it's not, then it may not be a fair fight in all cases in terms of what's going to spread. If you move to the next slide. I want to also point out that we are facing a new and challenging information environment in some ways. Educational institutions all across the country are now competing with smaller and more informal sources of information online. And some of those may not be professionally trained. They may not be aligned with scientific institutions. And we just have to be aware of the fact that they may have a fair amount of exposure for our students and their families. We've moved from a situation where we had a handful of broadcast channels to now the internet and social media platforms. And so what's challenging about that is that we may not always necessarily know exactly what our students are seeing. It's not always possible to see into their social networks directly. And that's something that also is really important for us to keep in mind, is that what you're seeing on your screen may not be the same as what your student or your family is seeing. And so another reason to be cautious about what we assume is out there or what isn't out there. And another point here is that artificial intelligence is warping and changing our information landscape in really important ways. Sometimes it's helpful, but in other ways, there might be problematic challenges to this. You think about the summaries that are available on many search engines results, for example, now, and those are, on the one hand, maybe viewed by some as useful, but it also is taking away the longer list of all the various sources that people might dig into, on their own. So these are challenges, again, that we're all facing. If you move to the next slide, I will offer another comment. So here I just want to offer a couple of really important tips. What can we do in the face of all this? Well, the first is to be aware of first of all, this notion of misinformation about science as something that is problematic in situations where there is, in fact, a claim that's at odds with the weight of evidence. But it's also the case that in some areas of scientific inquiry, we don't yet have the evidence. And we've got to be humble about that. We've got to acknowledge that it is still perhaps even an unknown, even with regards to peer-reviewed science. Second, I think we generally speaking, as teachers, need to be patient with students that are encountering misinformation for all the reasons that I just talked about. If you are going to correct misinformation, you need to be explicit in doing that, but try to do so in a way that's not alienating and shaming and blaming. You've got to get people to come back in from out in the cold back into community, and to recognize that if you're simply shutting them down and shaming them, that's not really a recipe for good societal interaction, moving forward. Third, I think it is going to be really important for us to be able to find ways to answer the questions that students have, and to recognize that their curiosity is something that we want to cherish and embrace. And the fact that they are coming to you with questions is a good thing. It's a sign of a good and healthy relationship. And so I'll talk about this, but I really want to put a spotlight on resources such as LearningMedia here, because this is a place where you might be able to answer some of those questions that you yourself may or may not have all the answers to. I also think there are some tips we can pass along directly to students. And this is something, if you want to move to the next slide, I think all of us could be offering for all of our students as they navigate this in their own world. So as they are encountering information, it is really important for them to recognize when they see something that's too good to be true, it very well might be. It's important to also triangulate and to look for other sources of information. And that's something you might think about this, the shorthand being, get a second opinion when you see dramatic information or what might turn out to be misinformation. Second, it's really important for people to have a sense of where their information is coming from, to know what trusted sources they have. Increasingly, with anyone's cell phone, it's possible to flip through many different sources without really paying much attention to where information is coming from. But in fact, if you get yourself in the habit of actually limiting yourself to a handful of sources where you go and check news outlets and other sources where you pay attention to information and you look for it proactively, that can be a really helpful way as well, as opposed to just surfing through whatever you find on a social media platform as you move from piece of content to piece of content. But lastly, I think it also is really important for us to remember that we are all in this together. And this is a hard one for people to accept sometimes because you might feel really betrayed or frustrated when you see a relative or a friend sharing some piece of misinformation online. But I think it's probably best for all of us to assume good intentions here, and to actually, it doesn't mean we have to accept information that's false as being true. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think we've got to at least give people the benefit of the doubt and to recognize that there's opportunity to rebuild your community. Something that I also want to point out here as we think about our students, we think about their families, is that generally speaking, there's been a lot of hue and cry and worry about declines in trust in science. And I want to state unequivocally that while there are patterns of change and dynamism, it's also the case that most people still express confidence in science and scientists. This is the best available evidence that we have actually suggests that relative to other institutions, that science is still in relatively good standing. We've got to make sure that we hold on to and recognize that because the headlines don't always suggest that sometimes. All right, if you move to the next slide. I just want to also give another example here. I noted all the great resources you can find here on NOVA and PBS Learning Media. Another example of a topic area where there have been questions, is the question of vaccines, there in the headlines. And I just want to point out a project that the Reagan-Udall Foundation for the FDA and full disclosure, RTI International, the nonprofit research institute that I've worked on, as well as Dr. Raven Baxter, have worked on putting together a curriculum delivery platform. And here's a place where the focus is on how vaccines have been developed over time. What do we know about the science of vaccines? This is not necessarily a matter of suggesting ethically what you should or shouldn't do, but rather just pointing out, here's what we know about how these amazing technologies have been developed over time. And we have a pilot version of this available for you to sign up and log into. So if you just go to thescienceofvaccines.org, I'd encourage you to go there. You can request a registration. I do want to note that currently we are piloting this in North Carolina, so we've aligned this to North Carolina science standards. But those science standards do overlap with many other states, and we are thinking about what we can do as a national rollout, here as well. And everything's been clearly delineated and marked as well. So there's a large number of lesson plans and ideas and videos there as well. So just a quick shout out to that. So again, thinking about sources that are trusted, places that we might be able to rely on for information. If we move to the last slide, I just want to thank you all. I'm happy to also connect on social media or other places, but we can move off of this screen now and move to a Q&A. We've got a few minutes left if people have questions. So there have been some that have come through in the chat as well, but I'll open it up and see if Ralph wants to start in any particular place.
Thank you so much, Dr. Southwell. This is a really, really great and super informative presentation. I think it's just, super important to think about the role of empathy and of sort of communication styles of approach too. I think that is often, I think, an understated part of the process of managing, misinformation and disinformation is sort of the point of approach and the ways in which we choose to engage students, as well as our friends and family members who also are encountering misinformation and disinformation online. So we have a couple of questions here, and I'll just summarize this one. This question is about inquiry-based methods. Are there any specific activities that you know of that can help teachers or that can help students sort of engage in an inquiry-based method to learn about how misinformation is spread, and what are ways in which we can, really sort of focus on and use sort of an inquiry method to help students understand, so particularly in cases where just telling them may not be as effective. Are there any strategies you could think of?
Yeah, what's really interesting about your question, Ralph, is that you point out that there actually is a science of understanding what's happening with regards to misinformation about science. And so something I want to put in the chat here, it might have been earlier in the chat as well, but that National Academy's report really is an extensive look at interventions that might be taken at both an individual and a societal level to think about this step of teaching people how science operates is really vital. I actually think if you get one takeaway here, it's just recognizing that your effort to teach the process of science as opposed to just science facts is actually probably the single best step you can take in helping us collectively deal with misinformation more broadly as a concern. there's it really boils down to that. And so that's I would just endorse that. I know that actually there are from the case of vaccines, for example, some different examples of different methods of inquiry. But with regards to misinformation, there are different tactics you can think about, both how it is that people might make sense of claims. What evidence would they need to have? Critical learning with regards to unpacking evidence in journal articles, that type of thing, and asking the question about how it is it that and what do your sources suggest, and tracing those back can be really important for students, and to recognize that sometimes, as we've pointed out, we've been wrong about things before, but it doesn't, at the time, in an ethical way, people hopefully were using the best available evidence at the time. That's something I think is really important. These are really great. Okay, I know we've got just a couple more minutes. Any other questions?
Yes. So a question about case studies that you feel like might be effective. Are there any relevant case studies, particularly things that are happening in the news, that you feel like are really good entry points for helping students understand this issue? I know you mentioned that curriculum on the science of vaccines. I think vaccines have clearly been, I think, a flashpoint for many conversations around the spread of mis and disinformation about them, and just in general, public health issues. But are there any other case studies that you feel like are relevant now that might be really good entry points for students?
Right. So there's been a lot of work happening, all over the country, but there's been a coalition and a group in Maine, actually, that has also worked with folks in both in Louisiana and some other states as well around climate science. And in those instances, this goes back to the earlier question of inquiry-based learning in some ways, but really starting out and asking students to go out and make observations about various natural areas, and look at both what we know, what that might say and suggest about the nature of the climate that we live in. And so getting students engaged in asking questions, I think is absolutely vital. It's something that we've been doing for a long while. That's something that another takeaway message here is that there is this problem. This buzzword has been in the headlines, but a lot of our solution to it also are things that we've been doing for a while. And I think that that's actually, we've got to find reasons to, have students turn to and make available to them sources of information that answer the questions that they might have. There are instances which sometimes students are asking questions that are maybe a little bit outside of what might be in their textbook, or might have been encountered, and what can we do to actually take them to the next step of helping them answer questions. If people are asking questions about what the effects of artificial intelligence are going to be, well, some of that we're still in the process of getting evidence and getting information, but it doesn't mean it's not a legitimate question for a student to ask. And so asking them what we would need to find out, what can we do in terms of designing an experiment to figure out what an effect might be. I think that would be another good idea to keep in mind. Yep.
Great. Thank you so much. An additional question, and I think I know this was something that you mentioned briefly earlier on, but a teacher asked, any suggestions on how teachers in public schools can share these resources in states where teachers may be feeling discouraged from sharing about highly politicized science-related events and news? And so any tips for sort of navigating, what is now, I think, a very, that can be a challenging ecosystem for teachers who are worried about sort of the political sort of politicalization of the events and news.
Yeah. So I think, again, this is why so much of what I think we need to do across the board is really to have empathy, but also leave the door open for people to articulate why what it was that they're raising was important to them. There are instances in which there are certain values that are expressed by them raising, or concerns that they have about the world, and so finding ways to have real and open and honest discussions without necessarily just accepting at face value a particular claim can be important. And the only reason I raise that is that a lot of these issues can trigger emotion pretty quickly, and we know that emotion can override human information processing pretty easily. But that emotion, it may be on the part of the person who is pointing to a piece of misinformation. It also might be on the part of a teacher who's upset that somebody's daring to say something in their classroom. And that's something that we've got to think about. How can we lower the temperature and find places where we're looking for each other's humanity and assume people have curiosity and are expressing particular values. And those are sometimes questions that are a little bit outside of what science teachers are initially used to asking or answering questions about. And I'm not saying everything has to turn into an ethics and philosophy discussion, but I just think that approach can sometimes really help quite a bit to turn down the temperature a little bit.
Oh, can I add something as well, please?
Mm-hmm.
Before I came here, I actually lived in the Four Corners region, so I'm, familiar with, say, climate deniers and things like that. A lot of times there are certain words that are kind of triggering, and you can everybody's recognizing the changing weather patterns due to climate change. But if you leave off that due to climate change, you can examine the weather patterns, characterize them, build resilience to them, do most of what is related to that, but just not label it as climate change. And the same with the increasing temperature of the ocean, changing the chemistry, how's that affecting the organisms? If we're labeling that ecology and chemistry. I know it sounds kind of weird, but this is, again, we're coming through it and giving them the information that they have, and this is the evidence, and then they're ready maybe at some point to say, why is this happening? And it's climate change, so we can only do as much as we can, and so doing something is better than just walking away.
Great. Thank you so much, Sean. And I think we just hit 8 o'clock, so I think that is about it for us. Really, really thank you again, Dr. Southwell, for taking the time to share this presentation with us, for sharing these resources and providing this feedback and answering these questions. This is such an important conversation for educators to be involved in. And again, as we see all these changes happening, where many social media platforms are relying less on fact checkers, now it's a lot more sort of community oriented sort of fact checking. It does often seem that this is an ecosystem of social media and digital media that is changing very, very quickly. And you throw in AI into that, and things can seem a bit insurmountable at times. But it's important to know that there are strategies and that there are approaches that can be effective in making sure that students are not only sort of equipped to deal with these issues, but are themselves sort of more conscientious consumers of digital media and of social media that they encounter in their everyday lives. And so we really, really thank you again for sharing these resources. Thank you to everyone who's joined us for this webinar. And yes, we invite you to please explore the PBS LM collection. Check out all the incredible NOVA resources that are there. I think we have a couple more slides that I'll just show for the closing. Sean, I'll let you take it away from here. Let me pull these up very quickly.
Okay, this is just a reminder, everything you saw tonight can be found on PBS LearningMedia. Check out our site, everything there is free. Next slide, please. These are just examples of collections that you may want to check out, science, math, and these will all these links will be in the sheet that you'll get tomorrow, sent out to you with the link to the recording. Next. Oh, and please help us do better. If you'll give us some feedback by doing the survey, and then post survey. Once you fill out the survey, you'll receive a certificate of attendance that you can use as PD credit if you need something like that. Other than that, thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate you spending your time with us. Happy New Year for all of those who celebrate tomorrow, and good night.